Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the confirmation hearing today before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for Jeremy Carr to become the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations, in spite of his white supremacist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic views and social media posts since deleted. Joining us is Desirée Cormier-Smith, the co-founder and co-president of the Alliance for Diplomacy and Justice, who was formerly the State Department Special Representative for Racial Equity and Justice, and we'll discuss how Carr would be in charge of managing relationships with the UN and other international organizations he disdains and insults. Then we'll look into Trump's meeting with Netanyahu yesterday and whether Trump's yearning for a Nobel Peace Prize overwhelms Netanyahu's opposition to Trump making a nuclear deal with Iran. Joining us is Mark Fitzpatrick, an Associate Fellow for Strategy, Technology and Arms Control, and the former Executive Director of the Washington-based America's Office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, as well as former head of the Institute's work on non-proliferation. He served as a U.S. Foreign Service officer and as Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Non-Proliferation, and his books include Asia's Latent Nuclear Powers, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, Overcoming Pakistan's Nuclear Dangers, and The Iranian Nuclear Crisis, Avoiding Worst-Case Outcomes. Then finally we'll speak with Lisa Graves, one of the nation's foremost experts on the right-wing influence on the U.S. Supreme Court and other levels of power. She leads True North Research and co-hosts Legal AF, and has served as a senior advisor in all three branches of the federal government, as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department, as Chief Counsel for Nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as a Deputy Chief of the Article 3's Judges Division for the U.S. Courts. She's the author of the new book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights, and she joins us to discuss what can be done to protect and preserve the rule of law when we have a lawless Justice Department that has become Trump's crooked law firm. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, Desirée Cormier-Smith, who is the co-founder and co-president of the Alliance for Diplomacy and Justice. Welcome to Background Briefing, Desirée Cormier-Smith.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And there were hearings today before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for Jeremy Carr, an extremely controversial nominee. And frankly, I guess the questions are, not so much, we know that there's a possibility that he won't get confirmed because one Republican senator said that he won't vote for him, and all the Democrats clearly won't vote for him. But I guess the real question is, how did this fellow with such blatant white supremacist, anti-Semitic and homophobic views get nominated in the first place?
That is an excellent question. It shocked me to see that he had gotten this far. It also shocked Senator Cory Booker, who started off with his line of questioning, essentially saying, I never thought I would see someone who's made the comments that you have in front of the U.S. Senate. And I'm glad he made that statement because I think it's important for us not to grow numb to the blatant white supremacy of this administration. And the fact that they would put someone forward for a Senate confirmed position to represent the United States of America at the United Nations and to the rest of the world through the United Nations is really shocking and appalling. We should not grow numb to that.
And he would be representing the U.S. in the United Nations and in international organizations around the world, right? And
That's right.
And around the world, if you look at the global picture, a white supremacist is representing what 7% of the world's population in the face of all of Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc. And I mean, it's insulting, frankly. But is this a part of Trump's kind of contempt, where he's always put Dracula in charge of the blood bank, whether it's at Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, FBI, DNI, you name it?
Yeah, I mean, it is shocking. It's also deeply offensive, but it's also counterproductive. This is the thing I just don't understand about this administration and the way that it is conducting its foreign policy. They seem to think that they can just bully the rest of the world into submission. And in Mr. Carl's opening statement in his hearing today, he talked about how, if confirmed, he would ensure that, countries vote with the United States. And it's like, are you kidding? Why would they vote with the United States if they're engaging with someone who believes that they are inferior to white people, right? Why would they vote for the United States when you are trying to bully them into submission, where you are not coming to them as equal partners to try and find shared values, right, and shared alignment on issues, but basically trying to just force them into submission? It just doesn't make sense. That's just not the way the world works.
Right, but since he's a believer in the Great Replacement theory, what he's saying to minorities both at home and abroad is that you're just a bunch of sheep being used by the Democrats to vote.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and also I think, the other important thing to remember about this conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement theory is that it is also deeply anti-Semitic. So people who believe in this conspiracy theory think that Jewish people are somehow behind this plan to have people of color and immigrants replace white populations around the world. And when pressed about this and his belief in the Great Replacement theory, he could not justify it. I mean, and you can't, because it is horrific, it's racist, it's anti-Semitic, and it's just not true. But it was shocking to see how someone who has written about this and spoken so much about how this is a real thing, couldn't even muster a coherent defense of what he believes and how that wouldn't impair his ability to engage with the nations of the world.
And he himself was born Jewish, right? He converted to Christianity.
That is correct, and he often uses that as an excuse for his deeply anti-Semitic views.
So he's taken down about 5,000 of his social media posts, right, to try and sort of change the record. But in the hearing today, it doesn't sound like he did really distance himself from these noxious views.
That's right, which was also shocking, right? At one point, a senator asked him if he stood by his belief that white people are the most discriminated group of people in America. And he said yes. And the senator said, I just want to confirm, you believe that white people face more discrimination than Black Americans in this country? And he said, essentially, I stand by that statement.
Well, it's unbelievable, but I guess it is believable given this attitude. This all goes back to Trump, doesn't it? I mean, where do you find people like this? Under what rock do you find people like Jeremy Carr?
Unfortunately, I don't think you have to look under a rock. You could just go to X now, which is kind of where all the white supremacist um anti LGBTQI plus folks, anti women, they all go and convene and kind of talk to each other and encourage each other on. It's quite disturbing and quite offensive. And contrary to what America is supposed to stand for, which is, a nation where all are equal, and where anyone can live up to their full potential, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, or background. We know we've never lived up to that. But this administration is actively trying to move us away from that ideal. And it's really concerning. And I encourage all of anyone who disagrees with that to speak out and not accept this as the norm.
And of course, Elon Musk, the owner of X, is the richest man in America. He's also essentially bought the last election for the Republicans and is in the process of buying the next. And not a day goes by without Elon Musk posting some racist white supremacist meme. So
Yeah.
he's actually really quite open about it now. Not that people missed his two Nazi salutes at the beginning of Trump's second term. But
Right.
let's look into the Trump administration's withdrawal from 66 international organizations and 31 United Nations agencies. And they withdrew from work for racial justice, human rights, and global development, such as the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, which the US has actually never funded, the
Right.
UN Women, which the US gave $15 million a year, the UN Population Fund, to which the US cut $377 million of funding in 2025, and the UN Human Rights Council, to which the US gave $35 million in 2025. So a lot of people are suggesting that the only rational and reasonable person in the Trump cabinet is Marco Rubio, but those figures don't indicate that he is somebody that you can rely on.
Completely agree. I mean, I think that was the message people wanted to believe at the beginning of the administration, but I think Rubio disproved that very quickly. When he was a senator, he used to stand for things like human rights, like gender equality, like protection for marginalized ethnic groups, like the Uyghurs in China. And yet we have seen him completely walk away from those commitments and, in many cases, completely undermine the State Department's ability to promote human rights through the complete restructuring of the State Department, through the mass firing of career civil servants, many of whom who were focused on democracy, on human rights, on marginalized populations. So, I think Rubio has shown that he is willing to go along with this white Christian nationalist agenda that the White House is setting.
Well, there's no mystery about the President Trump's racism. And what did he do today? He's blocking the only black governor from attending the annual governors conference at the White House, which has always been bipartisan.
Mm-hmm.
So Westmore of nearby Maryland has been told not to come, and it's obviously because he's black.
Yeah, I mean, again, I believe in the words of Maya Angelou, when someone tells you who they are, believe them.
So why do we then take this guy seriously? Why does the press take him seriously? Why do we treat him like a normal president? He's the president of angry and minority white America. He's not the president of America.
That's right. And he has no qualms about that, right? Like he's very clear. He doesn't see himself as representing all Americans. He definitely doesn't see himself as, representing the interests or the needs of Black Americans, of Latino Americans, or anybody else. It is exactly what you said. He sees himself as the president of his base, which is largely aggrieved white people who believe that somehow, the diversity of this country is a threat to them. And I think, he is very clear about that. And I don't know why the media isn't clearer about that and isn't doing a better job of holding him to account.
So, Desirée Cormier Smith, let's talk about your service in the United States Department as the first inaugural Special Representative for Racial Equity and Justice from 2022 to 2025. So, the kinds of relationships you developed and the attitudes of people around the world, have you talked to them since Trump? Because obviously there's been a total sea change since Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I still do talk to folks from around the world, and their reaction is a mix of shock, of horror, of disbelief, of sadness. Um, yeah, I mean, I think they truly are appalled at what this administration is doing, and I think they all expected different policy choices, right? But the way that this administration is actively shunning allies, actively undermining the United Nations and the global international system, attacking countries like South Africa on the basis of lies, but clearly on the basis of an anti-Black agenda, is really beyond what most people expected.
So, can you take some small comfort in the fact that he's also just as disdainful and insulting to white Europeans?
I actually do take a little bit of comfort in that because I think Trump and his administration look to Europe as their sort of natural allies, or as they put it, quote unquote, civilizational allies. And I think they assumed that the Europeans would go along with this white Christian nationalist agenda. And it has been, I think, heartening to see many of the European leaders stand up and say, no, this is not who we want to be. This is not who we are. And we reject these notions. However, it is concerning that this administration is actively engaging with far right groups and political parties across Europe to try and build sort of transatlantic cross-boundary alliances of far right, I would say anti-rights or groups such as the AfD in Germany.
So, just back to today's hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it wasn't just Jeremy Carr who was up to be the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations. You also had Wesley Brooks to be Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environmental and Scientific Affairs. And again, that's another case of Dracula in charge of the blood bank. And William Long as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the Republic of Ireland, and Robert Sweeney to be U.S. Director of the Asian Development Bank with the rank of Ambassador. So how do the other ones fare? We know that it looks like Carl may not get the votes because one Republican, I believe, has already said that he won't vote for him. Is that right?
I think you misspoke. So William Long was actually nominated to be the ambassador to Iceland, not Ireland.
Oh, sorry. I misread that.
Yeah,
Iceland.
Iceland. And he got quite a bit of attention as well because he previously made some off the cuff remarks about how he can't wait for Iceland to be the 51st state. It's
these guys haven't looked at an atlas, right?
it's really, I mean, I just don't understand how this administration thinks that anyone who has said such inflammatory, offensive remarks about a country could credibly represent the United States' interest in that country, right?
So, but Carl, who was it that on the Republican side that voted against him or that said that he would vote against him?
That would be Senator Curtis from Utah.
I see. And that would sink him, wouldn't it?
That is the hope, yes.
Right. And what do we know about Wesley Brooks and William Long?
Unsure. I haven't seen any public statements from any of the Republican members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as it pertains to the other nominees and how they intend to vote. I will just say, particularly as it pertains to Mr. Long, no offense to him as a person, but there's nothing in this man's background that renders him qualified to be an ambassador to Iceland or to any other country. And so I couldn't help but to be struck as I listened to the entire hearing, but particularly as Mr. Carl and Mr. Long were speaking, just on how unqualified these men are. And it's just deeply ironic because this administration and their supporters love to demonize diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and categorize them as somehow bringing in unqualified people. But none of these folks are qualified at all. And if anything, the only reason they're in these positions to be confirmed is because they happen to be white men. So that sounds like diversity, equity, and inclusion to me. Like, it's just projecting here.
Right. Well, Trump appointed Don Jr.'s ex-girlfriend to be ambassador to Greece.
That's right. Based on what qualifications, right? Like,
well, apparently, they like her in a way because she's a party girl and she gets drunk and smashes a crockery, which is a kind of a Greek tradition.
Great.
So the bar is pretty low, Desiree.
It really is. You kind of have to laugh to keep from crying because how we are just eroding our global influence, our allies, our partnerships, our credibility by putting in completely unqualified people in positions of authority and by actively undermining and removing qualified career experts. I mean, it should really concern every American because it's not funny, actually. I mean, it is actually detrimental to our national security.
Well, Desiree Cormier Smith, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Anytime, Ian. Thank you so much for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Desirée Cormier Smith, who's the co-founder and co-president of the Alliance for Diplomacy and Justice. And from 2022 to 2025, she served as the U.S. Department of State's inaugural special representative for racial equity and justice. In this groundbreaking role, she led efforts to promote and advance the human rights for marginalized racial and ethnic communities around the world through U.S. foreign policies and programs. We're going to take a brief station break back looking into Trump's meeting with Netanyahu yesterday and whether Trump's yearning for a Nobel Peace Prize overwhelms Netanyahu's opposition to Trump making a nuclear deal with Iran. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Mark Fitzpatrick, an Associate Fellow for Strategy, Technology and Arms Control, and a former Executive Director of the Washington-based America's Office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, as well as a former head of the Institute's work on non-proliferation. He served as a U.S. Foreign Service officer and as Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Non-Proliferation, and his books include Asia's Latent Nuclear Powers, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and The Iranian Nuclear Crisis, Avoiding Worst-Case Outcomes. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mark Fitzpatrick.
Thanks for having me, Ian. Good to talk with you again.
Likewise, Mark. And what do you think about yesterday's meeting between Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu? It looks as if, well, the headlines say there's no definitive agreement between Trump and Netanyahu, and that U.S. talks with Iran will continue. So I guess the main question would be then, is Trump's obsession with getting a Nobel Prize is more powerful than any efforts on the part of Netanyahu to persuade him not to make a nuclear deal with Iran?
Ian, I think that's a possible way to look at this. But another way is that we don't know exactly what was said. We don't have very much information at all. And the information we do have could very well be a ruse, a ploy. as it was back in June when the United States was continuing diplomacy with Iran while Israel was plotting to attack. The United States had planned another round, and suddenly Israel attacked and caught Iran flat-footed. And then after that, we learned that it had all been arranged beforehand. So we well could see another scenario here where Trump is talking diplomacy, but has secretly given a green light to Netanyahu. I wouldn't doubt that at all. And not just a green light, but a promise to weigh in with Israel with all the assets that Trump now has ready to be deployed. If I just say one more thing, we can get into this more. What exactly does Trump want? He's stated all these goals, which are just far-fetched, far beyond what is at all likely that Iran would agree to. And so in a way, when you set goals like that, you're setting yourself up to diplomatic failure, but an excuse to attack. Or would he be willing to settle for something less and by demanding a whole lot, maybe get more than he would have originally wanted? There's a lot of questions here.
Well, the Iranian President Pezeshkian says that they're not going to yield on their nuclear demands. They're not going to give up their program. So if they're not going to give up their nuclear program, they're sure as hell not going to give up their missile program, which is what Netanyahu's asking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And not just are they not giving up the missile program, they're not going to give up their support for the non-state actors, the militia, the proxies that have been such a vital part of their deterrence against Israel. Those proxies are now seriously defanged, but they're still in place, and they could come back with further support from Iran. So I think Iran will continue to support them. Netanyahu wants Iran to totally rid itself of any means of defense against Israel's far, far superior might. And as you say, Iran's just not going to do that. On the nuclear front, the requests are actually less demanding compared to the missile and proxy issues. On the nuclear front, Trump is demanding giving up uranium enrichment, which has always been the Republican Party demand. And before it was not possible because Iran just was never going to give that up. But now Iran is not even enriching uranium. Their capability has been drastically retarded. And it's conceivable that some deal could be struck whereby Iran would agree to forego for some period of time, not reconstituting the program while not giving up the right to it. And that would be a win for the United States if Trump was willing to take such a win and just forget about the missiles and the proxies and then also the human rights abuses that Iran has been conducting.
But Iran, apparently, according to intelligence reports that, obviously I haven't seen them, but I've heard about them, that Iran basically, the highly enriched uraniums that they had in these stainless steel canisters, first of all, you don't store it all together, what you have. You don't put all your cash, your crown jewels in one place, because highly enriched uranium is dangerous when it's all stored together. So it's pretty clear, I think, they have enough highly enriched uranium for maybe 6 to 10 bombs. And it wouldn't take much from the enrichment stage that they're in to get it up to weapons quality. It could happen within a week, probably. So maybe that's why they're not that worried about further enrichment, that they feel they may have enough already.
Well, that may be the case, that if you have 10 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium and you have a facility that you've been working on called Pickaxe Mountain near Natanz, where you could further enrich it, that they have this capability. If all they wanted to do was have a few bombs, they have that basic capability. But I don't know. These canisters are maybe partly buried. Maybe, as you say, they're dispersed into different places. I'm sure that Israeli and U.S. intelligence satellites and human assets are keeping a close eye on wherever they might be. And if Iran tried to dig them out, that might then spark another bombing raid. So for the time being, I don't think Iran can use these canisters of HEU. They may be just letting them sit there until such a time in the future as it becomes more possible and more expeditious to get them out.
So if this is basically about Trump's ego, because if you look at the deal that he made over Venezuela, it's not very encouraging, because he got a good media hit out of kidnapping Maduro, and that lasted a week or so, and he looked good, and he was on top of the world there for a while. But he's left behind a completely the same bunch of crooks running the place. So I'm just wondering whether, at the end of the day, he'll make some cosmetic deal with the Iranians in order to get his Nobel Peace Prize, and it'll be a bad deal.
That's, I think, very, very possible. But let's examine what the possible deal might be. In the nuclear area, there are three things that he wants and rightly wants. One is that Iran resume full cooperation with the IAEA, allow the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors to go back into where the places that have been bombed, to get on site there, and to get eyes on the canisters of HEU. So transparency is number one, and that's required under Iran's agreement with the IAEA. So Iran's been violating that. That should not be so hard to do. It doesn't agreeing to that wouldn't violate any of Iran's red lines. So transparency, number one. Number two is turning those canisters over to Russia, getting the highly enriched uranium stockpile out of Iran. Iran says they're not going to do that. But that also, I think, is something that is doable, because in the 2015 Iran nuclear deal with Obama, Iran agreed to send out its stockpile of enriched uranium to Russia. So they've already done it once. There's no principled reason why they couldn't do it again. So I think, if Trump could get that, that wouldn't be bad, but that would be basically the same deal that Obama got. So Trump needs more than that. So number three, he wants Iran to agree to forego uranium enrichment. As I said, that's something the Republican Party policy people have been asking for a long time. And there, I think there might be, as I said, some workaround, because Iran's not enriching uranium now. And, uranium enrichment has only brought Iran trouble for reasons of space and a sense of, national sovereignty and all that. They keep saying they're not going to give it up, but maybe they could agree to forego it for a time being. So that would be something that would be beyond what Obama got. And I think if Trump could get those three things on the nuclear front, and on missiles, maybe call for further talks or some transparency or something that he could claim. And then on the human rights, say, some agreement whereby the killing would stop. Killing is already stopped, so they could fudge something there. And on the proxies, well, the proxies are, as I say, already vastly reduced in power, and you could probably fudge something there as well. So I think Trump could come up with something that many, looking objectively, would say, well, this isn't really much of a deal, but it would be better than Obama, and I think it would serve interests of peace and of U.S. national interest. So not so bad. Would it deserve a Nobel Peace Prize? I'll leave that up to the Norwegians.
Right. Well, obviously, you've got to hope for the best, and you've got to reward him if he does the right thing. I'm just a little skeptical and somewhat cynical about him and his motives, and particularly following the fact that he asked the Iranian people to rise up against their government, encourage them to do so in the recent uprisings, and said that and warned the government of Iran, if they hurt the demonstrators, he'd do something really serious to them. Well, he didn't. He hung them out to dry, and by the way, the baby Shah did the same thing. So, I mean, how do you feel about that, Mark? I think he's got blood on his hands, doesn't he? And so does the baby Shah.
Well, yes, he does. and you rightly blame him. But he's, in fairness, Ian, he's not the first U.S. president to have done that. Back in 1968, when Johnson was president, told the Czechoslovakian people to keep going in their struggle for throwing off the communist yoke, and they did. And the United States didn't go in and help them as they had expected. Or look at the time when the Shiites in Iraq were rising up against Saddam Hussein. And the United States said, yes, throw off the yoke, rise up, we'll be there to help you. And there was President Bush, and there was no help at all to them. So it's not the first time that a U.S. president has, said he would help and then he didn't. But I think the irony here is that here Trump set a red line and then didn't honor it. And all the times we've heard Republicans criticize Obama for having set a red line in Syria about chemical weapons and then not honoring it and thereby, destroying U.S. credibility. Well, I think the exact same criticism should be applied to Trump, just keeping in mind he's not the first one.
So back to the Netanyahu-Trump meeting yesterday in the White House and the extent to which, obviously Trump is the only American president since George Bush Sr. who's really, or maybe Eisenhower, who's really been able to stand up to the Israelis, which is pretty interesting in itself. It seems like he's the one person, Netanyahu, simply can't, bring to heel. And Biden, of course, was heavily criticized for his inability to rein in Netanyahu. But Trump seems to be able to do it. But what do you think's going on with this extra aircraft carrier battle group that'll be there in the region, I guess, at the end of the month? Is that just extra leverage on the Iranian talks, or are they basically giving the talks with Iran a couple of weeks, and if they don't yield what Trump wants, then he'll do what perhaps he promised Netanyahu he would do?
Yeah, I think it is mainly extra leverage to try to scare the Iranians into agreeing to something because they have so much heavy metal bearing down on them. This may be just a bluff, because does he really need another aircraft carrier to attack Iranian missile sites or to try to attack Iranian leadership? I mean, he certainly doesn't want to go in any kind of a full-scale war. So how much does he really need? I'm not a military planner, so it's a naive question for me to ask, but I just can't help but think part of this is a bluff. As for the first part of your question there about standing up to Israel, Trump has not followed Netanyahu all the way on everything, but he's come pretty close. I mean, back in June, following up the attacks on Iran, they were very much in sync then. Most of what is going on in Gaza is in sync. There are a few, some small things where the United States has not gone along exactly, but, they're basically not very far apart. Most recently, Israel is changing some policies in the West Bank, which many have called de facto annexation. And Trump hasn't said anything negative about that. And I imagine that was also part of his talk with Netanyahu yesterday. And I think it's very possible that Trump would have gone along with what Netanyahu wanted to do there. Trump probably did not even understand it all. Finally, one last thing. Who was the last president that really stood up to Israel? It was John F. Kennedy, in my recollection, because Kennedy is the one who insisted on inspectors at Dimona to try to stop Israel from going down a nuclear weapons path. And Kennedy was serious about nonproliferation, but Lyndon B. Johnson wasn't. And, then Israel went on to get nuclear weapons.
But just in closing, though, given the recent history, it would seem to me we're in a situation where it's possible that, as I suggested, a cynical deal could be made. Is there anything in the possibility that just as if you use the Venezuelan example, you end up with the same people in charge. The real power behind the throne are the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And is there any way that you could make a deal with them to stay in power because they're the power behind the throne? That's what I find so troubling, is that the sacrifices that the Iranian people have made. I mean, you've got to be pretty brave, Mark, to go out in the streets and stand up in front of people that just shoot you down, and as the IRGC did recently. I don't see the Iranian people coming back for more punishment. I think they're in retreat now. But I'm just wondering about whether at the end of the day there is going to be a deal made with the IRGC.
It is horrible what the Iranian people have had to face. 20,000, maybe 30,000, maybe more deaths in those 2 days of January. They're in retreat now, but this will happen again. It's happened. It breaks out. Protests break out every few years. It would be marvelous if something would happen to change the regime in Iran. But for the time being, if we want to bring transparency to Iran's nuclear program and reduce its ability to turn canisters of highly enriched uranium into nuclear weapons, the United States has to deal with parties, for whom we want to hold our nose. And so it is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Even if they're not at the table, they're the ones, as you say, backing it up. And you just, when you do deals, you have to deal with the devil and try to get transparency and verification. And if it results in a safer Middle East and U.S. national interests are furthered by reducing Iran's nuclear capability, then I say go for it. And I'm sorry to the Iranian people that it doesn't help them in the meantime.
Well, Mark Fitzpatrick, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ian. And I'm sorry I ended up on such a cold-hearted note.
Well, that's realpolitik. And again, I've been speaking with Mark Fitzpatrick, who's an Associate Fellow for Strategy, Technology and Arms Control, and a former Executive Director of the Washington-based America's Office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, as well as a former head of the Institute's work on non-proliferation. He served as a U.S. Foreign Service officer and as Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Non-Proliferation in the State Department. And his books include Asia's Latent Nuclear Powers, Japan, South Korea and Taiwan, and The Iranian Nuclear Crisis, Avoiding Worst-Case Outcomes. We're going to take a brief station break and back discussing what can be done to protect and preserve the rule of law when we have a lawless Justice Department that has become Trump's crooked law firm.
Watch out, I'm gonna explode like atomic bomb.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Lisa Graves, one of the nation's foremost experts on the right-wing influence on the U.S. Supreme Court and other levels of power. She leads True North Research and co-hosts Legal AF, and has served as a senior advisor in all three branches of the federal government, as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department, as Chief Counsel for Nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as a Deputy Chief of the Article 3 Judges Division for the U.S. Courts. And she's the author of the new book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and his accomplices rewrote the Constitution and dismantled our rights. Welcome to Background Briefing, Lisa Graves.
Ian, it's always a joy to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And it was not a joy, but an absolute disgrace that took place yesterday before the House Judiciary Committee, the hearings of the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who, to quote Donald Trump, is a nasty woman, the ultimate mean girl. But I guess the broader questions is, can one person destroy the Department of Justice? I mean, you were Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Justice Department. Do you think that there's any way that we can preserve the rule of law when we have a lawless Justice Department that has become Trump's crooked law firm?
Well, one of the most important ways that we have coming up is to have control of Congress not be in the hands of Trump loyalists, and not have the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, be in the hands of Trump bootlicker Jim Jordan, but to actually have Democrats holding the gavels on the House Judiciary Committee and ideally the Senate Judiciary Committee, where they can conduct investigations, demand answers, demand documents, and hold Pam Bondi and others responsible for turning the Justice Department into the private, basically the private lawyer to pursue Donald Trump's agenda of vengeance and try to basically restore the rule of law, restore the proper role of the Justice Department as an entity that is not there to basically do the political bidding and knee bending that we've seen from Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and from other parts of this Trump machine in office, including some of these U.S. attorneys or temporary U.S. attorneys or people who are not actually U.S. attorneys but have been designated by Bondi to play that role.
Well, I just wonder, though, how just one person like RFK Jr. can destroy HHS, which he seems to be doing at an incredible speed. I mean, they've only been in for 1 year, and the damage that's being done on a daily basis is breathtaking. The same with Kash Patel at the FBI, the same with Hegseth at the Department of Defense, the same with Tulsi Gabbard at the ODNI, and I could go through the whole list. So that's what I wonder. I mean, are we in a situation, if the Democrats come back at the end of the year, assuming that there isn't a midterm election in November, I mean, are we in a position, the opposition in this country, in a position to essentially, like, are we cleaning up the elephant dung after the parade has passed by?
Well, it is the case that because of the way that Bondi has been wielding the Department of Justice has lost millions, probably tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment in career officials, people who have longstanding experience, for example, in the public integrity section, people who have deep experience in conducting nonpartisan investigations of corruption, people who have deep experience in the U.S. attorney's offices in terms of just the criminal and civil investigation. There's just been a squandering of resources to redirect that agency to advance Trump's extremism and defend him and go after his political enemies. And so some of those people have left those jobs, and they're probably not going to come back into the government. They will have secured other positions in the meantime. And that's a huge loss for America. When I think about DHS and the destruction of RFK Jr., that's the loss of expertise, scientific expertise within the agency, but the devastation to longstanding important scientific trials, to investments in efforts to try to find a cure for cancer or mitigate cancer, efforts to pursue vaccines that protect us against deadly and dangerous diseases that maim or harm people. That's the loss not just of those internal experts, but of deep investments that we have had as a nation in public health, investments where those scientific experiments and ongoing trials have been disrupted in ways that cannot be repaired, that we're going to have to start over. We've lost years, if not decades, as well in the fight against climate mitigation because of some of the actions being taken by the administrator of the EPA, including the endangerment finding, rescinding that today. So it is deeply destructive. It is a bit, like you say, of cleaning up the dung after the parade of elephants has passed. But we're going to have to do that cleanup because the destruction is so deep and so wide and so damaging.
And what's it all about, though? Is it all about this one man's malevolence?
Well, I in a way it is, but it is he is accompanied by so many cronies, so many people who are willing to do anything for him. Like I have to say I'm not sure we should call it testimony by Pam Bondi, although it is actionable as some of the members described, but her statements, her behavior at that hearing were simply appalling. They're unbecoming for anyone in the role of Attorney General of the United States. The burn book is ridiculous. The use of that the use of our resources, taxpayer resources, to give her these attack pieces instead of actually answering questions in response to the legitimate, rightful oversight of that agency by Congress was extraordinary. She could not get away with that behavior in any court of law. She would be held in contempt of court if she treated a judge that way in a court. She would not be allowed to behave that way in corporate America. Can you imagine if there were a meeting of a CEO with a board or with employees in which the executive behaved that way toward people who were raising questions or providing information? It's shocking. We saw at that hearing that Pam Bondi even had papers in her hands that showed that the Justice Department was tracking the precise search terms used by members of Congress, like Congresswoman Jayapal, in looking into those Epstein files to try to get to the bottom of the information that this administration has been hiding as part of the biggest cover-up ever in U.S. history. That's astonishing. But also her willingness to basically serve Trump to inject in that hearing about the Epstein files the notion that we should not be focusing on that because the stock market is doing well. That is revolting. It's disgusting from a moral standpoint. And also, as an aside, quite frankly, the stock market is operating within a bubble because of that AI bubble, not because the country overall is doing well economically. In fact, we're far worse. But that's beside the point, because the point of that hearing was to get to the bottom of this disgusting behavior, this ring of sex trafficking orchestrated by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and to get to the bottom of the fact that this administration, the Trump administration, and Bondi have done nothing to actually prosecute the men who harmed so many women. And she could not even move herself to turn around and face the survivors, many of whom have been deeply harmed by Epstein and his schemes, but some of whom also had their private information revealed by the Bondi Justice Department, which has taken more care to try to expunge Donald Trump's face from photos in the file, including news photos of Trump, rather than to take care to protect the identities of survivors. She could not even do the most basic human thing and turn around and respond to those survivors and apologize for the failure of her Department of Justice to meet with them while they spent hours meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell before Todd Blanche and the team, in essence, had to approve her transfer from the prison that she was rightfully committed to go to this country club prison where she gets puppy time.
And she's not the only Trump lawyer, right? I mean, the top of the Justice Department are all former Trump lawyers, with Todd Blanche as the deputy. And, of course, the other guy who was given a judgeship, right, on the appeals court.
Yeah.
Beauvais.
Yeah, right. You have...
And Sauer, the Solicitor General. They're all Trump's lawyers. And by the way, they didn't do such a great job, neither, did they?
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary to have a United States Department of Justice with so many top leaders whose previous roles included specifically being the criminal defense attorney or impeachment defense attorney for Donald Trump, for this president. It just shows you exactly what's happening here, which is that loyalty to Trump is the test for a job, not loyalty to the Constitution, not fidelity to the rule of law, not support for making sure that our laws are enforced in an independent and nonpartisan way. Instead, at each turn, in each significant position, you have someone who has literally served Trump, and now we are paying for their salary.
So, given how disgusting it is to think that these people's main focus is to protect Trump and the pedophiles, these powerful men, I mean, I think the catchphrase should be that they're all pedophile protectors. You remember recently, Lisa, a UAW worker, when Trump was touring, I think it was the General Motors plant in Detroit, called him a pedophile protector, and apparently Trump flipped him the bird. But the long and the short of it is that, isn't that a perfect description of what's going on?
Yes, I think that it's a fair description that anyone who is obstructing the investigation, the prosecution, the release of information about these pedophiles is a pedophile obstructor. One of the most horrific of the many really horrifying materials that have been released, and much of the material has not been released, was one of those emails, and that was one of the emails that apparently Representative Jayapal was looking for, was the email where one of Jeffrey Epstein's buddies says that the little girl he saw that weekend was naughty. You know, that email came forward with that text, that content was in it, but the guy who sent it, his name was protected. His name was redacted. That's extraordinary. Why is this Justice Department going out of its way to protect the friends of Jeffrey Epstein? And in fact, by the way, one of the things that happened last year, in the latter part of last year, when Donald Trump was trying to pressure Lauren Boebert and trying to pressure, Marjorie Taylor Greene to not support the discharge petition to have the Epstein files vote go forward to get those released, he said that he was concerned that if the files came out, it would hurt his friends. Well, we have a right to know who they are. Who are those people that he has been trying to protect? Who are the people that Donald Trump's minions at the Justice Department, like Pam Bondi, are trying to protect? We have a right to know that information. At this point, these files really need to be called the Epstein-Trump files, because as Representative Raskin noted, as part of his search through those files, as part of the oversight process, millions of files that have not been released, he found that Trump's name is mentioned more than 1 million times.
So the worst thing, though, I mean, we don't know. There's probably so much worse stuff. And most of all, there's this apparent video of Trump in Palm Beach, I think at Epstein's place, with a party of young girls as young as 13, where he's sort of testing their, I won't even say it. It's just horrible. Horrible. But what we've just gotten out of the latest batch is incredibly disgusting, and that is that this Gulf potentate from Abu Dhabi, I believe, said in exchange of emails with Epstein thanked this guy for a torture tape that he had sent him. What the hell is that about?
Yeah, it is depraved. There's just so much depravity. It's just so many morally repugnant things that are either expressly said, like that exchange about a torture video, or things that have been alleged that are part of these files. Obviously, Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that he's done nothing wrong. He's denied any wrongdoing. He hasn't been charged. But this administration is working mightily hard to try to keep hidden information about the perpetrators, about the men involved in Jeffrey Epstein's schemes with Ghislaine Maxwell. And, who knows what horrors they're hiding. One of the things that was most chilling for me over the past couple of weeks was when Todd Blanche announced that supposedly this was the end. These were the last sets of files, even though more than half of the files remain not disclosed, not shared, regardless of the redactions or not. He said in that press conference that they, of course, redacted information or redacted material or photographs showing people who were harmed or killed. If there are snuff tapes in those materials, which is what that statement implies, or other torture or harmed individuals, those individuals need to be revealed. Those perpetrators need to be revealed, and they need to be prosecuted. And if they can't be prosecuted for some reason due to a statute of limitations, their names need to be revealed so that people who were victims of these individuals can pursue them in civil court. And if we need to change the rules for a statute of limitations there, then we should do it to make sure that the survivors or their families get justice.
Well, Trump apparently, in talking with the chief of police of Palm Beach, who brought about the first prosecution of Epstein, referred to Ghislaine Maxwell as being evil. And evil, of course, is the operative word here. It is just shocking. Lisa Graves, I thank you very much for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Lisa Graves, who's one of the nation's foremost experts on the right-wing influence of the United States Supreme Court and other levels of power. She leads True North Research and co-hosts Legal AF, and has served as a senior advisor in all three branches of the federal government, as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department, as Chief Counsel for Nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as a Deputy Chief of the Article 3 Judges Division for the U.S. Courts. And she's the author of the new book, Without Precedent, how Chief Justice Roberts and his accomplices rewrote the Constitution and dismantled our rights. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.